Good morning. Let's all do the prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Par Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhu Bhuva Swaha, Tatsavitra Varenyam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachodayat. Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamya. Om Sehna Bhavatu, Sehna Bhunaktu, Sehviryam Karvavahi, Tejasvi Navadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahi. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om. Starting from verse number 167, Shankaracharya ji started talking about explaining Manomaya Kosh. As you all know, that we are the Atma, the soul, the spirit, but we have 5 layers of personality. Annamaya Kosh, which is the food sheath, Pranamaya Kosh, which is the vital air sheath, then Manomaya Kosh, the mental sheath. Then Vijnanamaya Kosh, which is the intellectual sheath, then Anandamaya Kosh, the bliss sheath. Okay? So this Manomaya Kosh, he started explaining it to us and negating it that we are not this. This is the main point over here in this part of Vivekachudamani, that we are not the Manomaya Kosh. Just like he said, we are not the Annamaya Kosh. We are not the Pranamaya Kosh. We are not the Manomaya Kosh. So starting from 167 all the way to 183, that many verses he's explaining this to us. So let's look at verse number 172. Vayunah aniyate megha punha ten ev niyate मनसः कल्प्यते बन्धः मोक्षा तेन एव कल्प्यते. Vayuna, by the wind. Aniyate is brought. Megha, clouds. Puna, again. Ten, by it. Ev means alone. Niyate. Niyate means it's scattered. Niyate. Manasa, by the mind. Kalpyate is caused or creates or imagines. Bandha, bondage. Moksha, liberation. Ten, by that. Ev means alone. Kalpyate, again means caused. So the wind gathers the clouds. Okay, with the help of the wind, the clouds gather together. And the wind itself scatters them. So clouds come together with the help of the wind and they get scattered with the wind also. So too, the mind is responsible for bondage, also for liberation. Because we often recite that verse, Manaiv moksha nam karnam bandh moksha. So this is what he is saying over here. Mind is responsible for bondage and also for liberation. And then he is giving us an analogy over here, the clouds. So clouds are brought together by the wind and they get scattered by the same agency. Okay? So by the mind, a person considers himself or herself limited. Mind is the one which thinks that I'm limited. Mind is the one which makes us think we are mortal. Mind is the one which makes us think we are bound. And when the mind brings the storms of agitation. This Atma, the shining Atma, self-effulgent Atma, is not readily recognized. But when the agitations of the mind are reduced, the same mind is turned towards a subjective experience. All the sense of limitations, all the sense of bondage ends by the same mind. And how the mind causes bondages and how the same mind brings about the liberation, that is explained in the next verse. Let's look at verse number 173. देह आदि सर्व विषय परिकल्पय रागम बध्नाति तेन पुरुषम पशुवत गुणेन वैरस्यम अत्र विश्वत सुबुधाय पश्चात एनम विमोचयति तत्मना एव बंधात. देह आदि, body, etc. Adi means etc. Sarva Vishay, for all objects. Parikalpya, having created. Ragam, attachment. Badhanati, binds. Ten means by that. Purusham, the person. Pashuvat, like an animal. Gunen, by ropes. See, gun means qualities also, gun means ropes also. Varasyam, distaste. Atra, here. Vishvat, like poison. Subudhai, having thought. Paschat, thereafter. Enam, him. Vimochyati, liberates. Tat manah, that mind. Ev means verily. Bandhat, from liberation. So mind causes a person's attachment for the body. We are all familiar with that. So mind causes a person's attachment for the body and the sense objects. These attachments bind him like an animal that is bound by ropes. Thereafter, the same mind creates a distaste for the very same sense objects as though they were poison and liberates person from his bondage. Okay, so he's just explaining it further for us how this mind binds us. It binds us through the objects. Because from the standpoint of the mind, the body, the sense organs, and the objects of the world are all objects. This body is an object too. Other objects are also objects. So by this attachment, he gets bound and becomes limited and sorrowful. So this Atma, when it's tied down, then it's called a Jivatma. When it's free, it's Atma, Shuddha Buddha Atma, pure Atma. But when it's tied down, then it's a Jiv, which is called a individualized Jiv. So its freedom is all gone. When it's tied down, anything which is tied down, freedom is gone. And that's why we live as an abject slave of the mind. Even though we are part of God, immense freedom, liberation is there. But we think that we are the slaves. So, on account of the attachment for objects, Individual gets bound like a animal gets bound with a rope. And what are the three strings of the rope which we are tied down? It's a sattva, rajas, and tamas. Those are the ropes for us. It's almost like a bird could be all free, can fly anywhere bird wants to. But bird sees the reflection in the mirror or in the clear glass, gets bound. Sometimes these birds we have seen, they'll hit themselves in that mirror and die, even though they can move away, but they don't feel that freedom. So attachment gets created with its own reflection, and that's how we get attached. And that's how we lose our omnipotency, our omnisciency, and become limited jeev. And we think we have a freedom, but we think it's a limited freedom. So it started from the objects, worldly objects. But limitation comes to a person when he gets rid of his meaningless fascinations for the sense objects. When we understand, when we overcome this fascination, and that's what's called vairagya. Vairagya. See, rag means attachment, rag means desire, and vairagya means a state of desirelessness. But over here he is saying vairasya, tastelessness. So when the taste for these worldly objects or the worldly indulgence is gone, we don't we don't have a taste for it because we want to taste something higher or we have a glimpse of something higher. We just don't want to go after these lower tastes. So this passion is also brought out by the mind. This vairagya is in the mind. See, just like we know that nobody is attached for poison, right? Nobody, because we know the knowledge we have. So we don't have any rasa for the poison, no taste for the poison. So the same way, when we understand that everything in this objective world is no good for me, they are bondages for me, then you won't have any taste for it. So lack of taste creates desirelessness, and by understanding that there's no real taste in the object, the mind frees us completely from the persecution of the world of polarity. That's what happens. So he's trying to just go a little deeper into it, how this mind is the one which attaches, and the same mind can gets us the liberation. So manaiva manusyanam karnam bandha moksha. Whole journey is the journey of a mind. Let's look at 174 now. तस्मात् मनः कारणम् अस्य जन्तोः बन्धस्य मोक्षस्य च विधाने बन्धस्य हेतु मलिनं रजोगुणे मोक्षस्य शुद्धं विरजः तमस्कं तस्मात् therefore. So because of the previous verse, he says mind is the one which is the cause. So he says therefore, manaha the mind, karnam the cause, asya of this, janto jeev, bandhasya of bondage, mokshasya of liberation. Cha means and, va means or, vidhane bringing about, bandhasya bondage, of bondage, hetu cause, malinam blemished, like a mal, rajogune by the effects of rajas, rajsikta, mokshasya for liberation, shuddham pure, Virjaha tamaskam, free from rajas and tamas. So we raj and tam. So free from rajas and tamas. So Shankaracharya ji is saying, therefore, the mind is the cause for both liberation as well as bondage. When it is blemished with the effects of rajas, it causes bondage. So that's why we got to rise above Rajsikta also. When it is free from rajas and tamas qualities, it paves the way to liberation. We are still on the journey. We are on the path, but we have to sure do more sadhana, but have rajas and tamas under our control. So whenever these rishis they say therefore, that means we got to understand the meaning which was given to us before this verse also. So it's almost like a reasons explained in the previous verses. He says that it should be clear that the mind alone is the cause for bondage as well as for liberation. So liberation is only a state of mind. Atma is always liberated. It is never bondage. It's beyond bondage and liberation, but mind thinks that it's bondage. Because Atma, which is only a state, it is like a real nature. Our real nature is the Atma. It is never bound. So when we talk about liberation, that liberation is only with reference to the bondage. So when one is really liberated, there is neither any bondage nor any release. That's why we say it's just that. So the conditions of bondage and liberation are only states interpreted with reference to the condition of the mind. That's what he's trying to tell us. So this Rajogun comes into play because of Tamogun. Okay. See, Tamogun is a non-apprehension. When there is a non-apprehension of reality, then we misapprehend. So Rajogun is misapprehension and Tamogun is non-apprehension. We cannot see something and we just draw some wrong conclusion. But when these taints are removed, when there's a quietness, there's a calmness, when it becomes predominantly sattvic, we experience that we are free and we need to have the total liberation also. So, in other words, when the mind is turned inwards towards sattvikta, Om, our own real nature, our mind full of sattva, because then mind is moving away from the tricks of the mind. Okay, so Rajsikta and Tamsikta, we need to work on it. Then he says in 175, विवेक वैराग्य गुण अतिरेकात् शुद्धत्वम् असाध्य मना विमुक्तै भवति अतः बुद्धिमता मुमुक्षुः ताभ्याम दृढ़ाभ्याम भवित्वम् अग्रे. Vivek, discrimination. We are all familiar with this term now. The name of the scripture itself is Vivekachudamani, discrimination. Vairagya, dispassion. Gun ati rekat, due to predominance of the qualities. Ati re. Shuddhatvam, purity. Asadhya, having gained. Manaha, mind. Vimukti, for liberation. Bhavati, becomes. Ataha, therefore. Buddhi mataha, by wise. Mumukshu, by one desirous of liberation. Mumukshi. Tabhyam, by these two, Dridabhyam, strong, Drid, Havityam, should be. Agre means first. When the mind has been made pure, due to a predominance of discrimination and dispassion, it turns towards liberation. These two must be strengthened by one who is an intelligent seeker of liberation. So, if we understand that liberation is so important for us, we don't want to stay bound anymore. We are a seeker of liberation. That means we really want to know who we are. We have to work on the Vivek also, Vairagya also. When there is a preponderance of these two qualities, Vivek and Vairagya, discrimination and dispassion in a person, he can attain purity of the mind. Otherwise, how do we know how to purify our mind? Through Vivek and Vairagya. We've been talking about Vivek. Let me give you the definition of Vivek again. The power to discriminate between the real and the unreal, between spirit and matter, between the self and the non-self. That is Vivek. Okay? Power to discriminate between the real and the unreal, between the spirit and matter, between the self and non-self. And what is the Vairagya? Vairagya is the capacity and the heroism to reject the unreal, the matter, and the not self. That's Vairagya. Not getting attached to something which is not real. Why waste your time? Okay? So, attachment to the real. But first, we have to know what is real, what is not real. So, in order to make the mind pure, Shankaracharya is saying we have to develop these two qualities. We have to intelligently, we got to apply the self-denial of sense pleasures. Only then the dispassion will increase. Whether through tapasya or whether through any other means. Self-denial is not good for me. Just like I told you earlier, we can deny ourselves from the poison. No matter how thirsty you are, if somebody gives you something to drink, and before you are drinking, somebody says, "Oh gosh, do you want to kill yourself? There's a poison in it." You know that. No matter how thirsty you are, you'll never drink it. So, the same way we got to apply our intellect for the sense pleasures because they degrade us. We lose ourselves, we forget who we are. And by study, by reflection, by contemplation upon the scriptures, discrimination will increase. These three are needed: study, reflection, contemplation upon the scriptures. That's the only way our discrimination will increase. And when the discriminative power is developed, it will definitely help us to increase our dispassion. So they help each other. Higher the discrimination, higher the dispassion. And when dispassion has increased, there will be a greater power of discrimination. So they are complementary to each other for our self-development. That's why all the scriptures talk about it, whether we open Bhagavad Gita or we open Yog Darshan. Right now we are studying Vivekachudamani, or we can look at any Upanishad. The same thing, Abhyas and Vairagya. Okay? So when the agitations in the mind are reduced, the veil over the intellect is lifted. Rajogun and Tamogun, they get eliminated. This kind of a mind is a useful mind for liberation. Mind which is full of Rajsikta and Tamsikta is no good for a seeker of liberation. That are more and more Sattvika. Because mind is not the instrument with which reality is comprehended. The pure mind, why do we need to purify our mind? Because the pure mind acts as a catalytic agent. That's all. Atma is there. It's not that Atma has to come from somewhere. So when the pure mind in his presence, that the presence of the Atma, the dissolution of the individuality takes place. Like I am this body, I am my achievements. So in the presence of that kind of a pure mind, this happens. So that's why he's saying that intelligent aspirants should strengthen these two qualities in themselves. Develop discrimination and dispassion in plenty, not just a little bit, in plenty. Let's move on to next one, 176. Manaha Nam Mahavyagra Vishe Aranya Bhumishu Charati Atra Na Gachantu Sadhva Ye Mumukshvaha. Manaha, mind. Nam, Nam means called. Mahavyagraha, a huge or a great tiger. Vishe Aranya Bhumishu, in the forest of sense pleasures, in the jungles of sense pleasures. Charati, wanders, rounds. Atra means therein. Na gachantu, let not wander. Sadhva, virtuous, sadhu log. Ye means who, mumukshuva, desires of liberation. A huge tiger called mind wanders in the thick jungles of sense pleasures. Let not those virtuous people who have a deep aspiration for liberation ever wander therein. Because who is wandering in these sense pleasures? Mind is. Mind wants to go there. Mind wants to see that. Mind wants to have this fun. So that's why he called it a great tiger. Wants to go into the jungles. But virtuous people, sadhu log, the good people, they don't do that. They understand the goal of life. So over here, Shankaracharya ji is indicating to us people who are doing the sadhana to be careful with your minds. Have a control over your mind. Because mind has the capacity to run out into the sense objects. And once it has escaped, it will pull you down into the jungle, Vishya. Just like a thick jungles, there's no end to it. The same way, the Vishya, the sense objects, they will tear you to pieces. It will make you a victim of sense pleasures. So never enough. Okay? It's always we see somebody else's. We are comfortably sitting, but we see something else on our Facebook or on our screen, or somebody talks about it. Before we know, we run after it. If physically we cannot run after it, mentally we run after it. So that's why he said, as a sadhak, we should always stick to the path of discrimination, vivek, and dispassion, the vairagya. Tirelessly, ceaselessly, never relax. Because the moment we slip from this path, the mind will take hold of you. And you will find yourself helplessly dragged in the jungles of the sense objects. And that's where the endless pain is. Initially, it looks like that there's an enchantment, but there's a pain. Okay? So we are the sadhaks, the serious sadhaks. We need to keep ourselves away from our blind identifications with the mind and its surroundings. Let's look at next one, 177. Manaha prasute vishyan अशेषान स्थूल आत्मनः सूक्ष्मतया च भोक्तुः शरीर वर्ण आश्रम जाति भेदात् गुण क्रिया हेतु फलानि नित्यम. मनः mind prasute delivers vishyan sense objects asheshan, that means all. See, shesh means when something is remaining. Ashesh means nothing is remaining, no remainder, all. So thul atmana, the gross, suksham tya, the subtle, cha means and, bhogtu, for the experiencer, bhogtu, shrir, body, varna, the caste, ashram, the order of life, jati bhedat, distinctions based upon the creed, gun means qualities, kriya means actions, hetu, the motive, the cause, falani, results, nityam, continuously. So there are three things he's telling us in this verse. The mind continuously delivers for the experiencer. Number one, all sense objects, gross or subtle, without exception. Number two, distinctions based on body, caste, order of life, and creed as well. And number three, the difference of qualities, actions, motives, and results. So again, he is trying to open up what this mind is. What does it do for us? So all the sense objects, without any exception, are bred by the mind. It goes on creating the gross things of the world outside and the subtle things inside. So it's not only the objects are created by the mind, but the subject, the enjoyer of the object, is also created the mind alone. We all know the gross objects, they have the forms, colors, sounds, tastes, smell, touch. And what is a subtle object? Subtle object is the feeling and its thoughts. And in the sense objects, gross and subtle, we find countless varieties, endless differences. And that's what he is talking about, the caste and the creed and the status and the position in life. And all of this is created by the mind alone. So difference in the qualities, the activities, their consequences, they're all created by the same mind. So it's such a big network created by the mind, this Manomekosh. With all these verses, he is trying to open up what this mind is for us. Then in the next one, 178, he says, Asang chid rupam amum vimoh deh indriye pran gunay nibadhye aham mam iti भ्रम्यति अजस्रम मना स्वकृतेषु फलो उपभुक्तिषु asang. See, sang means attached, asang means unattached. Chid Rupam, pure intelligence, Chid Rupa. Amum means to this. We moha, deluding. Deha means body. Indriya, sense organs. Prana gunay, with the ties of prans. Nibadhye, binding. Aham mam iti. Aham is the I. Mam means mine. So as I and mine. Brahmyati makes him wander. Ajsaram endlessly. Manaha mind swakrityeshu gathered by itself. Fal upabhugti. Upabhugdishu. In the varied experiences are the results. Fal means results or the fruits. So unattached, pure intelligence is the essence of the jiva. But the mind dilutes it and binds it by ties of body, sense organs, and prams. It causes this jiva to wander with the idea of I and mine in the varied experiences of results gathered by itself. So, in other words, he's saying that all of this, even though the jiva, when it's completely pure, Atma, but somehow this mind is the one which attaches us with all this, with the fall also, with the actions also, with the sense objects also. So mind does the trick by first deluding itself. See, vimohe, by forgetting its real nature. And having achieved this non-apprehension of reality, see, non-apprehension, then the mind makes a person attached to this matter also, sense organs also, physiological functions also, and he gets bound by the gunas. So it starts with the moha. That's what vimoha word is. So in a real, in, really speaking, the Atma is never deluded, but identification with the non-self makes us deluded. So the feeling of I-ness, even in yesterday's book, that's what we learned, I-ness and minus. So the feeling of I-ness in the activities of the mind and the feeling of minus in the enjoyment of the mind are the delusions created by the Manomay Kosh. Okay? So this is a delusion. And when such a feeling arises, it announces the birth of the Jiva. And this Jiva gets exhausted, it gets weary, it seeks for liberation then. So it is this mind with which you have to remove the mind. It's almost like if you have a little thorn in your skin and you find another thorn to take out that thorn which is by which you are getting hurt. So that little piece of thorn in your skin can be taken out with another thorn and you throw both out. So this is what we need to do over here. Okay? We are going to do uh, the Shanti part first and then the questions. And I'm going to stop the class here today. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaye Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti 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 Om.